All right, let's continue. I've been distracted by nonsense long enough. It's time to talk about something that's probably more serious. So what do we got here? We got Trump signing an executive order to end, not to sign. I don't know what I'm talking about. Taxpayer funding of NPR and PBS. So I think, as we all probably broadly acknowledge, I guess like school services, not school services, but like public services for the United States is complete dog shit, right? It's terrible. And like one of the sort of like, I guess, I think they're broadly speaking more trusted sort of vestiges of news that remains within the country I would argue would probably be PBS and NPR, broadly speaking. Although, like, I don't know, like, what kind of, like, political leanings they have. I think it's, like, broadly centrist or, like, nonpartisan, I think. But since Trump is wholeheartedly just doing a complete assault on, like, any form of, like, public service, and and this isn't just a Trump thing alone. This is a broad, like, sort of like Republican goal in general, because they hate public service and hate public workers, and they just simply want, well, one thing. Let's be quite honest. They just want like public sector workers to work in the private sector, because it's all about dismantling public services and the government to make it look bad, so they can push through deregulatory sort of legislation to get their, well, rich buddies on whatever industry more rich. Broadly speaking, we have an understanding of how all of this works. But what do you got here? From MSNBC. Trump's attempt to defund NPR and PBS is right out of the authoritarian playbook. Yeah, I think this is also like a not terrible sort of argument. I don't think this is a uniquely sort of Trump thing, though. I think, like, also this is a broad goal of the Republican Party. Liberals that I have this is one of the things I have a very large problem with. A lot of liberals, they see Trump as an aberrance, when that's just not the case. This is just the Republican Party. It's not an aberrance. This is on purpose, and should be called out appropriately and accordingly. But I don't expect this from, like, liberals. President Donald Trump's new executive order attempting to end public funding of National Public Radio and PBS, which is the public broadcasting system, could badly damage the reach of two vital American media networks. It's a move straight out of the authoritarian playbook and comes at a time of acute distress in the media market. As as NBC News reports, the executive order directs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to cease federal funding for NPR and PBS. You can't do this, right? Like, I'm pretty sure you can't just, like, they don't have to follow through with the executive order because it's Congress that allocates funding for, well, public services. But, I mean, considering the sort of era that we're kind of in, let's be honest here. Like, there's, like, no standards for any of this stuff, and people can think they can just kind of get away with and do, like, whatever they want. It's just kind of silly, Like, broadly speaking, we can all acknowledge that, hey, Trump and a Republican, like, Trump, you can't just, like, do this, because you have to have, like, it's not like due to, like, proceduralism or whatever. It's just like funding pertains to Congress's ability to regulate the purse. But Trump wants to stamp all over that because, well, he's an authoritarian crank. Obviously, he doesn't care about, like, the whims of Congress. He just wants to be an authoritarian, like, leave some sort of legacy before he dies off, because he's old. The order could be challenged in court on First Amendment grounds, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting put out a statement saying that Congress directly authorized and funded CBP to be a private nonprofit corporation wholly independent of the federal government. It's a private nonprofit. That's even fucking worse, I'll be quite honest, that that the CBP is a private entity. Maybe that's why, like, even Honestly, like, okay, I've had this argument before. You want to know, like, what the most trusted sources of news are for Canada? It's our public broadcasting, right? CBC, is it CBC, so the Canadian, not Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Is CBC our, it should be CBC as our publicly funded network. CBC, uh, public funding. Yeah, this should be our publicly funded one, right? Yeah, it has 4 sources of government, direct funding. Government appropriations for operating and capital expenditures. Yeah, and then, advertising fee, and they have, like, some private stuff, but, you know. Oh, Carney's gonna give them more money? And he pledged that? Based. But yeah, this is one of our most trusted sources of news. Like, for example, the reason why we know of, like, what is it? I think it's Loblaws doing the price gouging scandals on Canadian meat packaging is because of, well, public broadcasting. That's why broadly speaking, we know about that stuff. Which is objectively based. Very good, very cool. We love Canadian broadcasting and stuff like that. Objectively, the one of the best things about Canada is I don't know if it's robust is the correct term to use, honestly, but we have like public broadcasting, and because of that, we're able to like know stuff about sussy stuff that a lot of different corporations tend to do in order to try to screw us all over. Thank you, Canadian public funding, for public media broadcasting. We love that for us. Very cool and very good. And it is our most trustworthy news. There's a reason why Polyev wanted to fucking defund that shit, because, well, it would mostly report negatively on him. And there's a reason why Trump wants to go after PBS and NPR. Part of it is also just like the broad sort of like Republican agenda of just wanting to send like all public workers as often as possible to the private sector. But it's also because of the fact that, hey, they just hate all public services. Let's be honest here. Republicans hate public services. And they know, broadly speaking, that public services are like one of the biggest reasons for as to why they can't. It's a lot harder for them to get away with their wretched agenda. So, they like to go after that as much as possible. So the CEOs of NPR and PBS also say they're exploring their options for challenging the administration. Trump has long sought avenues to cut off support to public broadcasting, which is actually a time-tested Republican culture war target. Crazy. Whoa. They hate public services because they hate you. Shortly after he took office this year, his new head of Federal Communications Commission launched dubious probes into NPR and PBS. I can only assume because, well, they report biased stuff on me. They don't like me because they're just a bunch of liberal outfits. The liberals, they hate me so much. They just hate me. But yeah, sure, man. Yeah, genuinely all news in America is biased, so it's just a game of reading multiple articles from both sides and then matching it with statistics and a confident guess, Lamau. The problem with that, Zane, is, like, I agree with your assessment there. You're correct when you say that. No one has time to do that shit or any interest in or to do that much reading, which is, I guess, like, a byproduct that is leading, like, the sort of, like, dumbing down overall of, like, Americans. Which is why, like, public broadcasting has been as successful as it has been for the Canadians, right? Like, we have a generally pretty good idea about, like, news and stuff because of just how sort of, like, robust our public broadcasting has been. Like, people, generally speaking, have pretty big trust in CBC, and people don't really want to defund it. Like, Polyev said he wanted to defund it, and it was not a popular proposal. Like, people were just like, no, you're not going to do that. Like, screw you. The CBP is already suing the administration over its attempt to fire its board members. Now, in accordance with the authoritarian checklist sketched out in Project 2025, Trump is escalating this campaign by trying to starve the networks of funds while calling them left-wing propaganda. NPR and PBS have vast reach. NPR stations collectively broadcast to more than 40 million listeners a week. That's a lot of people. Because here's the thing, since these are public, a lot of people who live in like rural sort of like towns and stuff, they're not going to get like any fill of the news because guess what? Private corporations who are for profit, they're not going to want to fund stations out there to, you know, broadcast because, well, you got to make money. That's crazy, you know, and stuff like that. And PBS has more than 130 million viewers on traditional television a year. Damn, that's a lot of people. While most of their funding doesn't come from the federal government, losing access to that money would have a transformative effect on them and their tens of millions of listeners and viewers. I grew up with PBS, dude. Yeah, like we probably like we know why they want to do this. It's because, you know, Trump wants to have like unaccountable sort of reach and stuff. It's, you know, standard authoritarian bullshit. Why I also don't see ground news staying around for long because people are too lazy to read and don't want to read stuff from the other side. It's not always like about like stuff from the other side, to be honest. It's like, how do I like put this? It's never really like about that. It's just like people, it's partially because people are like too lazy and like intellectually incurious, you know, death of like subjectivity and stuff like that. Stuff I broadly talked about, the death of education in America and a bunch of other stuff. It's also because like it's just tough for a lot of people who are impoverished to want to get like educated and like look into stuff. That takes a lot of time, and people don't have time to do stuff like that. It's really sad to sort of put it that way, but it's unironically true. Like people just don't want to like learn about that shit because they don't have the time to learn about that shit, or like it's just like, bro, I have like so much other shit on my plate that I don't want to like get into like stuff like that. Like screw that. Like that's why people are saying like, you know, whatever. Parallel in India, Modi has defunded a lot of affirmative action programs, especially for lower castes. That's how he hopes to keep them voting for the BJP. Yeah, that's also another thing as well. Like a lot of people will talk about like, you know, like these public programs are just getting in your way. Like, and like, you know, saying, yeah, they're gonna get in your way of your opportunities as Americans. They're just not conducive. They're left wing propagandists. They can't be trusted or anything. Like that's also like a factor as well. Like remember, Trump also recently said in like a press conference while he was like sitting at the Oval Office saying, well, if we put in a millionaire tax, the millionaires, they're all gonna leave. They're not gonna want to stay anymore. They're gonna, when that's just like not true, obviously. America is one of the most highest consumerist sort of like markets out there on the planet, right? Americans love their consuming, so like it's a market that's impossible to avoid. So you can afford to tax the shit out of more people, and they're gonna want to just still stay anyways for the American market because of just how rich and valuable of a market it is, broadly speaking. But yeah, you know, we've talked about like the sort of like conservative attacks on a broader sort of like public broadcasting, public programs in general, because they know like those are probably the best things that well, challenge their power. You know, first order principle of every conservative: maintenance of the systems of control and hierarchy. As always, we know this. We know this. We've talked about this before. PBS chief executive Paula Kruger recently said in an interview that about 15% of the network's budget comes from federal funds. It's a significant amount, while the rest comes from viewers. I think, God, this is like, it's so fucking dog shit that this is the case, man. It should be all of it is coming from federal funds, to be honest, because it's public broadcasting. The fact that they have to rely on like viewers is, I feel like it's just bad. Like they're already, you know, getting tax dollars, but now they also have to rely on like donations and shit. I feel like this is so unfortunate. You know, we love the attack on public services. It's very cool and very good. But she emphasizes the reach that federal funding enables. The idea behind this public-private partnership is that there are many stations in communities that, without the federal support, the stations would not exist. Rural areas where it's not profitable. Kruger said, I have been to really extraordinary stations in small parts of the country, in places like Granite Falls and in Cookeville, Tennessee, where you just see that the public media stations are such an important part of the fabric of those communities. Yeah, they probably also hire a bunch of people, right? Like more like because otherwise, like, you know, you can't get like other high-paying tech jobs in like smaller communities, right? Like, where are you gonna get those from? Like, they'd have to like probably go into the city. Otherwise, there's like no other option for those people, right? According to NPR, it receives about 1% of its funding directly from the federal government and a slightly greater amount indirectly. Its 260 member institutions operating more than 1,000 stations, receiving an average 8 to 10% of their funds from CBP. NPR put together a document in 2011 that outlined the significant consequences of being cut off from federal funding. The New York Times, which obtained the report, ran a secret plan for the worst, notes. Most NPR member stations operate at or barely above break even. The report estimated that about a fifth of member stations would lose close to and up to 30% of listeners would lose. Member stations would close and up to 30% of listeners would lose access to NPR programming. That's a lot of people, right? They had NPR gets 40 million listeners, and they'd be 30% of that's 12 million. That's a ton of people. As the Times notes, in some rural areas where populations don't have access to broadband internet, those stations serve as one of the few reliable ways to get emergency information. Yeah, a lot of people might not know about tornadoes and stuff like that in say rural Kansas, for example, or Arkansas. Just complete random examples. You can just, I don't know, pull out of your ass or some shit. Just some random examples. Trump's executive orders states, unlike in 1967 when the CBP was established, today the media landscape is filled with abundant, diverse, and innovative news options. Okay, here's the problem with this. If you don't have access to the internet, which in rural areas it might be pretty difficult to have access to broadband internet, it's going to be pretty hard to get access to those diverse options. Also, we know a lot of mainstream privatized news is not going to want to broadcast in a lot of these more rural areas because, again, it's all about profit motive for those particular stations. And if there's no profit to be made broadcasting in those particular stations, they're not going to broadcast there. I feel like this is one of those things where it's just oh yeah, duh. That's so obvious. But that to a conservative is just mind-blowing. It's wait, you're telling me they won't broadcast there? It's yeah, because there isn't money to be made. Because again, private corporations are all about the profit motive. They just want to make money. And that's the problem. They want to keep people like yourself ill-informed so they keep having you as reliable voters. That's the point. It's all about maintenance of control, like I said before. While it's true that today's media landscape is diverse, it's also experiencing a funding crisis that has killed jobs and outlets across the industry. That's also a really good point. Yeah, what's the name of that one media conglomerate that buys up a ton of local news? I don't remember. Boy Meets Minnie, do you know what I'm talking about? I forget. I'm blanking on the name of this media conglomerate that has bought there's that video of them of all these local news anchors repeating some of their propaganda robots. I think you know what I'm talking about here. Ravaged local news coverage and made many surviving media operations incredibly unstable. Economic strains on the media sector are precisely why the latest World Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Borders, described U.S. press freedom as having hit a historic low. In other words, at a time when the country should be experimenting with more ways to publicly subsidize independent media, Trump is trying to torpedo them. Yeah, because independent public media are the things that are more likely to keep into account, not mainstream privatized news. For them, it's all about profit motive. That's the problem. And in order to maintain the profit motive and have connection to Trump, who's going to bring them ratings, they have to coddle to him. It's pretty obvious, to be honest, right? Trump's executive order against PBS and NPR is just one more plank of his authoritarian agenda, as he bullies universities, law firms, and nonprofits on various flimsy pretexts. Trump is likewise pursuing a litigious agenda against the media sector to devastate independent news and education for the American public. As with his other actions, this attack, even if unsuccessful legally, seems engineered to discourage NPR and PBS from pursuing the kind of accurate, fact-based coverage of his administration that could make it look bad. So, I'm glad that you know that Zishan, the reporter who has written this, has mentioned that in this report, because that's exactly what it is, right? It's all about an attack on, public media, which is the thing that's more likely to keep Trump to account for his, like, well, idiotic bullshit. We'll keep it a buck 50 here. It's common for presidents to verbally attack the press for what they view as unfair coverage, or trying to defund the media is a conduct of an autocrat. Yeah, it's all about that state news. Well, listen, Fox News, I love Fox News. They report so accurately and so well all the time. I love Fox. I love Fox, folks. Yeah, broadly speaking, we've seen this, like, sort of, like, whole authoritarian crackdown before. Like, this is not, like, unfamiliar and stuff like that. And broadly speaking, a lot more people are going to have trust and have, like, less information as a result of, like, funding stuff like this. And, like, unironically, this can also potentially just get people killed. Like, people can get harmed because of stuff like this. But, conservatives have never really cared about, people facing harm because of the sort of, like, consequences and actions of, like, their, terrible, wretched policies and stuff like that. Like, they don't care about any of that stuff. They wish to seek harm on you because, well, they see you as easy dupes to, well, make sure that they maintain their own power. That's, like, the overall point of this. It's why they have to constantly go after, like, the public broadcasting and media at all times, because, well, it's threatening to them because it makes them look bad. It's the same sort of, like, song and dance and spiel I've done constantly on this channel at this point. Like, all about maintenance and hierarchy of control. We know this. We know this. It's just unfortunate. It's just quite sad that a lot of good people probably have to, like, suffer for the sins of, like, I don't know, just complete conservative belligerence. Like, let's be honest here. That's, like, the whole point of this. They're doing it because they hate you, and it's all about maintenance of power and control. First order of principle for conservatives, as always. Never forget that. Never forget that.